WHGE 95.3 FM coming up. The Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on our people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, here to get your third eye open. Yes, indeed. Yeah, all right, come on now. All right, let me get my sound right. Every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And that's what we do right here on the Open Eye. Let me tell you something. Good morning, Wilmington. And everyone listening beyond these city blocks and across the digital airwaves. This is the Open Eye, when we step back from the noise, look past the headlines and examine the truth, the history, and the power structure shaping our lives. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's this: nothing that happens in the world happens in isolation. Wars don't begin the day the bombs start falling. Political corruption doesn't begin the day the news reports on it. And injustice doesn't begin the day people finally notice it. Every crisis has a history. Every conflict has a context. And every headline has a story they hope you never look into too deeply. Here on the Open Eye, we do exactly that. Today, we're going to talk about the forces shaping our world right now, from international conflict to political hypocrisy, to the manipulation of religion and power. Because the same systems that shape decisions in Washington or Tehran also shape decisions in our neighborhoods, our schools, and our communities. And as always, we're going to examine it through the lens that many media outlets refuse to use: history, truth, and accountability. Because informed people are harder to manipulate, and awakened communities are harder to control. So sit back, open your mind, and most importantly, keep your eye open. Hey, Sherry, I see you, sister. Let me get my disclaimer out the way. All right.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Hey, Vaughn, I see you, bro. All right. We're going to get started here. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. You know, they didn't just rewrite history. Yeah. They rewrote God. I got this from, I think Sherry did send me this, I'm not sure. but I noticed she posted it. All right, but let's deal with that. In 1807, the British missionaries produced a version of the Bible specifically designed for enslaved Africans in the Caribbean. But this wasn't a translation issue. It was a theological debate. It was deliberate spiritual control. According to the Museum of the Bible, which holds the only known copy in North America, the book was titled Select Parts of the Holy Bible for Use of the Negro Slaves in the British West India Islands. And what they did to the Bible was staggering. They removed 90% of the Old Testament and half of the New Testament. Out of 1,189 chapters in the Standard Bible, only 232 remained. Nearly 1,000 chapters erased. They didn't edit the Bible, they dismantled it. The entire story of liberation in the book of Exodus, Moses leading the enslaved people out of bondage, stripped away. The book of Revelation, with its warnings of judgment against oppressors, removed. The Psalms that speak of justice and divine vengeance, gone. Even epistle to the Galatians 3:28, there is neither slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ. That was cut out. Now, here's what they kept. Passages like epistle to the Ephesians 6:5. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters with fear and trembling. They kept the story of Joseph's enslavement in the book of Genesis, emphasizing not his suffering, but his obedience to his master. The message is unmistakable. Submit, obey, accept your chains. This isn't random. Historic records connected to the Church Mission Society show that Bibli Porteus instructed editors to include only passages dealing with the duty of slaves toward their masters. If you're a Christian, the timing matters. The Bible appeared, or this Bible appeared, in 1807. Why is that significant? Because it was just 3 years after the Haitian Revolution when enslaved Africans in Haiti overthrew the entire colonial system and created a free nation for which they'd never been forgiven for. Slave owners across the Atlantic world were terrified. Damn right. They saw what could happen when enslaved people believed freedom was their right. So they tried something even darker than violence. They weaponized faith. They took the very book enslaved people might turn to for hope and stripped it of any hope. What they did was they created a spiritual cage. Imagine encountering the Bible while enslaved. You expect to find Moses, you expect to find liberation, you expect to find Christ proclaiming freedom to the captives. Instead, you find obedience and submission. And a message telling you that God approves of your chains. Only 3 copies of the slave Bible are known to exist today. One sits behind a glass at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. A reminder of something uncomfortable. Power will manipulate anything to maintain control, even God. So the real question is this. How many other truths have been edited before they reached us? How many other stories had their liberation chapters removed? And how will we even know? Because history teaches us something very clearly. If someone is willing to rewrite God, they will rewrite anything. Hey, Steve. Let's keep it moving here. And I talk about Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is not some strange mutation that suddenly appeared out of nowhere in modern politics. It is not an alien corruption or otherwise apolitical faith. It is in many ways Christianity functioning in one of the most historically consistent political forms. Christianity did not remain a persecuted underground religion forever. That phrase was temporary. Once it fused with imperial power, first with Rome under Constantine, then with European monarchies, and later with colonial empires, it stopped being merely a spiritual doctrine and became governing logic, a framework for law, hierarchy, conquest, and legitimacy. When Christianity merged with empire, it gained armies, courts, land, and policy influence. But empire also gained something far more powerful: divine justification. We're going to talk about that. Kings no longer ruled by force alone, they ruled by divine right. Expansion was no longer just conquest, it became mission. Domination was reframed as civilization. That fusion shaped centuries of global history. From the Roman Empire declaring Christianity the state religion, to European crowns blessing conquest in the Americas and Africa, to colonial administrations carrying Bibles alongside flags. Christianity repeatedly functioned not just as theology, but as political architecture. It provided moral language for state power, social order, and national identity. This is why the modern language of nation, chosen people, moral destiny, and divine mandate fit so easily into nationalist rhetoric. Those ideals are not new inventions. They are echoes of older political theological traditions where church and state moved in alignment rather than tension. Now, that does not mean every Christian tradition supported empire. There have always been dissenters, abolitionists, liberation theologians like Peter Spencer, anti-colonial clergy, and radical reformers who challenged power in the name of their faith. Christianity has never been monolithic. It has contained both the theology of empire and the theology of resistance at the same time. But historically speaking, once Christianity gained institutional power and repeatedly adapted itself to governance, lawmaking, and national identity formation, it became embedded in constitutions, education systems, legal codes, and cultural norms. It helped define who belonged and who did not, who was civilized and who was the other. So when people frame Christian nationalism as a total deviation, they often ignore this long record of church-state fusion across empires and colonial systems. The more uncomfortable truth is this: Christian nationalism is not simply about religion. It's about power wrapped in sacred language. It's about political authority seeking moral legitimacy. And history shows us that whenever a spiritual framework becomes entwined with state power, it stops operating solely as a private belief and starts functioning as a tool of governance, shaping policy, identity, and social hierarchy. That pattern did not begin in the modern era. It is woven through centuries of imperial expansion, colonial rule, and nation building. The real question then is not whether Christianity can be used politically. History already answered that. The real question is whether any society can fuse religion identity with state power without eventually using that fusion to justify exclusion, control, and dominance, all while claiming divine sanction. Yeah. That's how you get mixed up with crap like I'm going to bring up. This is the Open Eye, WHGE 95.3 FM. Hey, brother. Who's that? Brother Slaughter? All right. Hey, I see you there, Steve. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. How many people ready for the rapture? Gibbs coming to get you. Yeah. A lot of people believe in that, 144,000. Where'd that come from? It's in the Bible, ain't it? Ain't it? Let's take a look. Where it come from? A Scottish preacher named John Nelson Darby introduced what is now called the rapture in the 1830s as part of a new theological system. For roughly 1,800 years of Christian history, no mainstream church taught a secret pre-tribulation rapture. The word rapture itself does not appear in most English Bible translations. What Darby developed was a new framework known as dispensation. Help me out. Sorry about that, y'all. Dispensationalism. Dispensationalism. Excuse me, y'all. I had a hard time getting that out. The idea that believers should suddenly be removed from earth before a 7-year tribulation. And that's what that is. Darby didn't just write about it. He traveled, lectured, and promoted the doctrine aggressively. And it found fertile ground in the United States during the 19th century. Then came a major turning point, the Scofield Reference Bible in 1909. Its study notes embedded dispensation interpretations directly alongside scripture, and suddenly millions of readers encountered Darby's framework as if it were standard biblical teaching. From there, theology became industry. Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth sold tens of millions of copies, predicting an imminent rapture tied to Cold War geopolitics. Later, the Left Behind series turned apocalyptic fiction into publishing empire, generating massive revenue through books, films, conferences, and merchandise. Entire church movements built their end-time teaching around a doctrine that had not existed for most of Christian history. Prophecy conferences became lucrative platforms. Fear-based timelines became sermon material, and generations of believers were taught to interpret world events through an ever-imminent escape narrative. Now here's the deeper commentary, and this is where critical thinking matters. The issue is not whether Christians can hold diverse views on the end times. Christianity has always contained multiple traditions, amillennial, post-millennial, historic, premillennial, and more. What is more historically notable is how quickly one relatively modern interpretation became culturally dominant in certain circles, especially in American evangelicalism. And it's still there. That shift tells us something powerful about theology, media, and market forces. When a doctrine aligns with mass publishing, media distribution, and institutional promotion, it can feel ancient even when it's relatively recent. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates authority. Authority then gets mistaken for tradition. And once fear enters the equation, fear of being left behind, fear of global collapse, fear of divine abandonment, the doctrine becomes emotionally sticky, not just intellectually persuasive. The real question is not simply who taught this doctrine. The real question is, how do ideals move from fringe theology to mainstream belief? Because history shows us that religious interpretation is not only shaped by scripture, it is also shaped by publishers, institutions, cultural anxiety, and economic incentives. When theology meets industry, belief can become product. When fear becomes marketable, it becomes sustainable. And once a generation raised inside a framework, it no longer feels new. Yeah. No longer feels new. Now, your children are not safe with Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. You are what you defend. Trump supporters cannot be trusted with children. Every single Trump supporter, in your view, has shown a willingness to support and defend an accused abuser over a child. And look what they've done. We're going to get into Trump's connection to the divine. This is the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. Yeah. Now your children around these Christian nationalists. And let me speak plainly here. If reports coming out of the U.S. military are even partially true, we are staring at something deeply dangerous. According to complaints filed with the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, more than 110, I think it's up to 200 now, service members from over 40 units across at least 30 installations say commanders are telling troops that the war with Iran is part of God's plan. Not strategy, not national defense, not international law, prophecy. One combat commander reportedly told non-commissioned officers that Donald Trump was anointed by Jesus Christ. Don't trust your children around these people. He was anointed by Jesus Christ to ignite a signal fire in Iran and trigger Armageddon. Referencing passages from the book of Revelation. Let's pause for a second there. The most heavily armed military on earth, a nuclear superpower capable of destroying human civilization, and people inside the chain of command are allegedly framing global war as biblical end-time prophecy. That's not faith. That's a apocalyptic ideology wearing a military uniform. And here's the other part of this that should make people shake their heads. The idea that Donald Trump, the orange disaster, convicted 34 felons, a stinky diaper, Epstein files, of all people, is some kind of divinely chosen instrument of Jesus the Christ. Think about that claim. This man, whose public life has been defined by greed, dishonesty, cruelty, and ego, a man who brags about exploiting people, insults the vulnerable, lies constantly, and treats morality like it's optional. A man whose entire political career has been built on division, resentment, and the cultivation of anger. And we're supposed to believe that this rapist was chosen by Jesus. Yeah, see, those that you know, haven't read the Bible or, you know, listen to ministers that are willing to twist that crap. Oh, well, you know, David had flaws and God loved him. So we're supposed to believe this man was chosen by Jesus. The same Jesus who, according to the Bible, preached humility, compassion, mercy, and love for the poor. That doesn't even pass the most basic smell test. You don't need to be religious to recognize the contradiction. Anyone who has ever read the teachings attributed to Jesus knows they revolve around service, sacrifice, and moral accountability. Those values are the exact opposite of the personality cult surrounding Donald Trump. So when someone claims this man was anointed by Jesus to start Armageddon, they are not expressing Christianity. They're weaponizing religion for politics and power. And that's exactly why the separation of church and state exists. The founders of this country have watched Europe tear itself apart for centuries because kings and generals claim divine authority. Armies marched under the belief that God was on their side. The result? Endless bloodshed. So the founders created a government where the state would not belong to any religion and the military would serve the Constitution, not theology. Because the moment war becomes holy, restraint disappears. Diplomacy becomes betrayal. Peace becomes weakness. Escalation becomes righteousness. And history shows us something clearly. Holy wars always spiral out of control. What makes the situation even more telling is that one of the complaints came from a Christian NCO, writing on behalf of 15 troops, including other Christians, a Muslim, and a Jew. Even believers inside the military are saying, this ain't right. Because faith is personal. But when faith enters the chain of command, it becomes pressure and coercion. See? A soldier should never have to wonder whether disagreeing with a religious narrative will affect their career or whether the people issuing orders believe they're carrying out God's will. And remember what we're talking about here. This is a country with thousands of nuclear weapons. If the people guiding military decisions start believing they are agents of the apocalypse, then protecting the world stops being the priority. As if it ever was. And that is why this issue matters so much. America is supposed to operate on law, reason, and the Constitution, not on someone's interpretation of apocalyptic scripture. The military oath is to defend the Constitution, not to fulfill prophecy. Because once a nuclear-armed nation convinces itself it has a divine mandate to bring about the end of the world, humanity itself becomes expendable. And that is exactly why the wall between church and state isn't just philosophy. It's a guardrail meant to protect civilization from people who believe they've been chosen to start the apocalypse. And that's the open-eye perspective on that for today. And let me add this. Something you heard me say. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, okay, are not popular by the quality of their wisdom. They are popular and have always been popular by the quantity of their violence. Dr. Clark teaches us, rightfully so, that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are all male chauvinist murder cults. Amen. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. You know, I vote Democrat. When I do, I vote Democrat. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. But don't get that mixed. Okay? I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. And I know people are tired of voting for the lesser of two evils and what have you. But let me tell you something. The evil on the other side is so goddamn evil that they almost make the left look like the real opposition party, even though we know they aren't. It's like the two crime families I always tell you. The Gambinos and the Genovese. The Genovese are going to kill it. You know, take what you got and keep it moving. The Gambinos, they might give you a seat at the table and some crumbs. The thing is that the Republican Party has become so incompetent and evil. I have to wonder, especially as a black man. I have to wonder how any black man could even take part in this. Both parties are corporate owned. The left, so-called left, is not really the opposition party. What has happened is, since the rise of Ronald Reagan, may roast to hell, may the devil sodomize him with a pitchfork, dragged the country so far right, okay, that in their desire to try to siphon off some of those from the right, the Democrats claim, claim to be the party of opposition. What they really are is Republican light. There's no real opposition power. Hey, Rhonda. But with that being said, I still have no respect for so-called black Republicans like Byron Donalds. Oh yeah, and he found his voice this week. Oh, not about police killings. No. Not about voter suppression. Not about the banning of black history in Florida schools. He didn't find his voice about the open racism black people deal with every single day in this country. No. His big moment of moral clarity came when racist and anti-Semitic messages leaked out of a Republican chat group. Now suddenly Byron Donalds wants to talk about values. Son of a bitch. Now he suddenly wants to condemn bigotry. And the question a lot of black folks are asking is real simple. Where is that energy when the racism is directed at us? Because Byron Donalds has built his political career standing shoulder to shoulder with a movement that routinely demonizes black communities, attacks civil rights protections, and rewrites history about slavery. This is the same MAGA movement that calls teaching about racism divisive. The same movement banning books about black history. The same movement that pretends systemic racism ended in 1965. And Byron Donalds had been right there defending it. So forgive people if they're not impressed when he suddenly discovers some moral outrage. Because selective outrage isn't leadership, it's political calculation. And people are asking another uncomfortable question. Is Byron Donald speaking up now because anti-Semitism is morally wrong? Or because criticizing anti-Semitism carries political consequences in Washington, more so than criticizing anti-black racism? Let's keep it real. In American politics, defending black people rarely brings campaign money or powerful lobby support. But crossing certain political interests, that can end a career overnight. So when Byron Donalds condemns bigotry in a party that he regularly defends, despite its constant dog whistles, people see something very familiar. They see a man who is willing to acknowledge racism, just not the kind directed at his own people. History has a long memory for that. Every era has produced a few black politicians willing to serve as the public relations department for power structures that harm their own damn community. Although they get television appearances, they get praise from people who normally attack black leadership, they get elevated as proof that racism supposedly doesn't exist anymore. But when the cameras turn off, the conditions of black communities remain exactly the same. Because symbolism without courage is just performance. And if Byron Donalds really wants to talk about racism and bigotry inside the Republican Party, he doesn't need a leaked group chat. He can start with the policies, he can start with the rhetoric, he can start with the people he stands beside every single day. Until then, a lot of folks are going to keep asking the same question. Is this about principles or about politics and power and money? Because leadership means speaking truth even when it's uncomfortable. And silence in the face of injustice, especially against your own people, has always had a name, and history remembers it. Sellout. WHGE 95.3 FM. All right. Moving right along. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Right here on the Open Eye. Yeah, I talked about Byron Donalds and what a sellout he is, and how he heard this so-called anti-Semitism. And see, even then, you gotta look at what was said. Because was it anti-Semitic, or was it just criticism or the corruption of this? It is not real state. Y'all know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because you cannot criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semitic. Even if what you're criticizing is the extreme, out of control Zionism that is committing genocide against brown people. But don't get it mixed. Because I have no loyalty to either Republicans or them Democrats. Because Democrats have a serious conversation and they need to have it right now. Because leadership matters. And right now, many voters are looking at the leadership of the Democratic caucus and asking a simple question. Let me kill this mic. Fuck Hakeem Jeffries. Is this the best the party can do? At the center of that question stands House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. Jeffries rose to power promising generational change in Democratic leadership. After the long era of Nancy Pelosi, the expectation was that a new leader would bring new energy, new courage, and a stronger voice for accountability. Bullshit! Instead, what we're seeing is a Democratic caucus that often appears hesitant, reactive, and politically cautious at a moment when the country is demanding moral clarity on issues like war, human rights, and the influence of money in politics. An issue that's now raising serious questions is the role of pro-Israeli lobbying money in Democratic politics. Investigations and campaign finance records have pointed to a shadow super PAC aligned with Jeffries that has been supporting pro-Israeli candidates in Democratic primaries. Much of that funding has come from networks like AIPAC and its affiliated political groups, which has spent tens of millions of dollars in recent election cycles shaping congressional races. And the strategy's been straightforward. Support Democrats who align with AIPAC's positions and oppose candidates, often progressive Democrats, who are more critical of Israeli government policies. For many voters, especially younger Democrats and communities of color, that raises troubling questions, because it means outside political money is being used to influence which Democrats are allowed to represent the Democratic Party. And when party leadership appears connected to those same funding networks, it creates a perception problem that Democrats can't afford to ignore. The Democratic Party claims to stand for democracy, transparency, and human rights. But if voters begin to believe that leadership decisions and even primary elections are being shaped by powerful lobbying money, then the party risks losing credibility with the very base it supposedly depends on. The credibility is the currency of leadership. Hakeem Jeffries needs to go, as does most of the top leadership of the Democratic Party, because they are not the party of the opposition. They are the party of the lobbyists. They are the party of the corporate control. Hakeem Jeffries is a piece of shit. When a political movement loses the trust of its own supporters, not only loses the trust of its own supporters, but turns on its own supporters in favor of a genocidal maniac supported by AIPAC. That leadership is the first place people look. Hakeem Jeffries, along with the rest, Chuck Schumer, Booker. It's time for generational change for real. This is Open Eye. Sick and tired. WHGE 95.3 FM. Okay. So Kristi Noem was fired. So Trump replaced Kristi Noem, who didn't even have a law degree, with Mark Wayne Mullen, who doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. as DHS secretary, and they had the nerve to call well-educated, overqualified black women DEI hires. That's a lot of nerve. Let me say something that needs to be said plainly. The same people who scream the loudest about DEI hires are the very people filling the government with the most unqualified, ethically bankrupt, and morally compromised individuals imaginable. Donald Trump has now replaced Kristi Noem with Markwayne Mullin, the leader of the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, let's take a look at this circus. Kristi Noem didn't have a law degree, which already raised serious questions about her qualifications to oversee one of the most legally complex departments in the federal government. But the replacement, Markwayne Mullin, doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. This is the same political crowd that looks at black women with Ivy League law degrees, doctorates, decades of public service, and international credentials and sneers DEI hire. So let's ask the obvious question. If qualifications matter so much to them, what are qualifications now? What was the concern about merit? What was the concern about competence? What's the concern about professionalism? Nowhere. Because the phrase DEI hire has never been about merit. It's always been about race. It's always been about discrediting black excellence. It was always about telling black professionals, no matter how educated you are, no matter how accomplished you are, we still call you unqualified. Meanwhile, look at the people they actually elevate. Kristi Noem, whose political career has been dogged by accusations of corruption, abuse of power, personal hypocrisy, including widely allegations of blatant infidelity while publicly preaching so-called Christian family values. These people are so hypocritical, it's unbelievable. And that's the moral leadership they lecture the country about. And now she's replaced by someone who lacks even the most basic academic credential expected of leaders overseeing national security policy. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for counterterrorism, border security, cyber security, disaster response, intelligence coordination, and immigration enforcement. It's not a student council position. It's one of the most powerful national security roles in the government. But today's Republican political machine, loyalty matters more than competence. That's word. Absolutely corrupt. Ignorance is tolerated. Corruption is encouraged. But what they can't tolerate, hypocrisy is tolerated. What they can't tolerate is black excellence. That's why you hear the slur DI hire, thrown at judges, professors, journalists, and public officials who have worked their entire lives to reach the top of their profession. Because to them, merit is only real when their people hold the position. Everybody else must have cheated. Now, here's the truth the American public needs to understand. The real affirmative action program in American politics has never been diversity initiatives. It has always been the production and promotion of mediocrity among powerful white political networks. Yeah, that's word. What is that? Lori Favors calls it white incompetent. White incompetence. Mediocrity. It has always been about the protection and promotion of mediocrity. That's the system that gave us leaders who are less educated, less competent, and less ethical than the people they ridicule. Until we start calling that hypocrisy exactly what it is, they will continue using race as a weapon to hide their own corruption, incompetence, and moral bankruptcy. This is Open Eye, Patrice Gibbs. WHGE 95.3 FM. Yeah. So, we're at war. Excuse me. No, we ain't. These dumbass Americans at war. We ain't had nothing to do with that, y'all. Give you some historical context here. Okay. The Iran hostage crisis, a pivotal moment in the history of the U.S.-Iran relations, did not occur in a vacuum. It demands a rigorous analysis that moves beyond the simplistic narrative that the actions were merely the result of religious radicals motivated solely by a desire to eliminate Western society. The question must be asked, if not sheer unadulterated hatred for the Western way of life or our freedoms, what historical context precipitated this profound act of hostility? Because that's the argument. They hate our freedoms. Now, I like the way Joy Ann Reid called that crap out. Because the essential, often overlooked context lies in the history of foreign intervention, specifically the 1953 coup d'etat. The United States, through the concerted efforts of the CIA, personified by the influential Dulles brothers and the State Department, played a decisive role in orchestrating the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. And the Dulles brothers were a pair of the most evil bastards that worked in the American government. And my name is Patrice. The reason I got that name is the Dulles brothers. Or one of them, the one that hit the CIA that convinced Eisenhower to have Patrice Lumumba murdered. Mossadegh's sin was not a hatred of democracy, but an act of economic sovereignty, the same as Lumumba. He moved to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which was the predecessor to the British Petroleum Company. He merely requested to audit the company's books, driven by the suspicion that BP was systematically cheating the Iranian people and paying them unfairly for their perceived entitlement. The U.S. and Britain decided that the vast oil wealth beneath the soil of Iran belonged not to the Iranian people, but to BP and the West. The consequence of this intervention was the return and entrenchment of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah was not a natural desired king by the Iranian people. His regime was in effect imposed by Western power. And for 26 years, the Shah ruled Iran with brutal and repressive action, utilizing the notorious Savak secret police to suppress dissent, torture political opponents, and maintain a tight grip on power. The intense hatred that eventually fueled the Iranian Revolution and the subsequent hostage crisis was thus intimately tied to the Shah's brutal U.S.-backed reign. The initial hostility towards the United States was, in essence, a rejection of the oppressive regime that the U.S. had installed and sustained. To assert that this hatred is only because they hate our freedoms is a willful blindness to history. It's an act of profound self-absolution that ignores the arrogance embedded within United States foreign policy. And not only the arrogance, but the corruption. And it's an arrogance that assumes the right to dictate the internal politics and control the natural resources of sovereign nations. America acts as if global politics unfold in a vacuum, believing that America's interventions, coups, and unwavering support for dictators have no causative link to the hostility directed at America. Of course it does. While the desire to police nuclear proliferation seems to be a noble and necessary global endeavor, it cannot be separated from the historical matrix of suspicion and resentment. The hostage crisis and the ensuing decades of animosity were not spontaneous explosions of irrational religious fanaticism. They were a direct response to a long history of intervention, exploitation, and the subversion of democratic self-determination by the United States. It's a stark reminder that actions in the global arena have consequences that reverberate for generations. All right. Let me see something here. Wait a minute. Let me get my notes straight, y'all. Might have to take a little musical break on this one. Yeah, all right. Let me see. Okay, this is the open eye. Let me get this up there. Yeah. All right. Tell you. Let's stick with that vein. We're going to continue on with this. All right. As America again beats the drums of war with Iran, we should pause and remember history, because history has a way of exposing uncomfortable truths. First thing I want to say on this. First of all, Netanyahu has been, since the 80s, trying to push American presidents to go to war with Iran. This warmongering bastard who has a warrant, an international warrant for human atrocities, has been trying to get America to go to war. And you have to wonder, how it is not real got to be America's pimp. Some of his hoes were rebellious and they wouldn't do it. What they got on Trump? Because Trump took the bait. Yeah. And I'm gonna go back to the hostage situation, 1979, when the Iranian students seized the U.S. embassy in Tehran and took American diplomats hostages. Something remarkably interesting happened. Within weeks, 13 hostages, mostly women and African Americans, were released. Why? Because Iran's leadership publicly said they viewed black Americans as oppressed minorities in the United States and therefore not responsible for the actions of the U.S. government. We didn't start this shit. Think about that for a minute. In the middle of one of the most hostile standoffs between nations, the world was forced to confront a reality many Americans would rather ignore. Americans' racial contradictions were visible across the globe. And this isn't a new conversation for Black America. Back in the 1960s, during the Vietnam War, heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali stood before the world and said words that still echo today. No, I will not go 10,000 miles to help murder and kill another poor people simply to continue the domination of white slave masters. Ali understood something fundamental about war and power. He recognized that poor people, often people of color, are set to fight other poor people in conflicts driven by politics, resources, and empire. History keeps repeating the same pattern. Working class Americans are asked to sacrifice their lives in wars decided in boardrooms and political chambers. Meanwhile, the communities that have historically suffered discrimination at home are expected to defend a system that has not always defended them. Now, none of this means Iran is righteous or the hostage taking was justified, which it was, but it does force a question that every thinking citizen should ask before cheering another war. Who benefits from this conflict? Because the soldiers in the front lines will come from neighborhoods where opportunity is scarce. The bombs will fall on people who look a lot like the people being sent to drop them. And the politicians calling for war will rarely be the ones sending their own children. Send Barron, Hegseth's children. Muhammad Ali refused to fight in Vietnam because he saw through the illusion. So the question for America today is simple. Have we learned anything since? Are we still asking the poor to fight the poor while power remains untouched? History is watching, and so are the people who remember. And we had this thing this morning. See, this is why they came up with this thing about igniting Armageddon. Thinking some stupid people was going to feed into that. God loves you. And he wants you to go to war because these people hate your preference. So you get out there because you're doing the righteous thing for God. And you're bringing on Armageddon because now is the time. There's a warning from a former CIA officer. There's a reason this war with Iran feels so confusing, so let me cut right through it. My name's Adam. I used to work for the CIA, and we've been doing daily updates on the war. Today, I'll give you the facts from the last 24 hours. But then I'm going to give you the tools to understand strategically why this war is spinning out of control. You don't think so? Well, 3 days after the war, Trump started talking about, let's come to the table and talk. Let me hold up on that for a minute. You roll up and punch me in my face, knock me down, and realize that I got a gun. You know what? Wait a minute. Let's talk. Iran said, "The hell with you. We ain't talking about nothing. I'm gonna kick your ass." Okay, moving right along with the warning from the CIA officer. He said last night the Iranians hit Azerbaijan's international airport. More explosions were reported in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE, continues to be one of the hardest hit countries in the region. There's footage claiming to show Iranian ballistic missiles over Jordan. Iran has also hit the primary oil refinery in Bahrain, which is still on fire, and a missile struck near a U.S. naval installation. A U.S. Navy submarine reportedly sank an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command is requesting support for another 100 days of Iran operations. So that's what happened. Now, here's why it matters. There's no longer a contained operation between Israel, the United States, and Iran. All right? The Strait of Hormuz has been closed. There's now a regional conflict involving at least 17 countries. And those currently in charge of American strategic policy are fundamentally unequipped to handle it. They also spent the last 15 months undermining America's diplomatic readiness and damaging relationships with global allies, both of which are absolutely necessary to manage a conflict on this scale. Consider this. Trump fired dozens of senior career diplomats. Several strategic diplomatic posts in the Middle East have been vacant for more than a year. More than 1,300 State Department employees were fired or pushed out, many of them Middle East and counterterrorism experts. They dismantled USAID, an agency that should be playing a critical role in navigating both conflict and post-conflict environments. Kash Patel also reportedly fired a dozen agents and staff from the FBI's counterintelligence unit, specifically tasked with monitoring threats from Iran. He goes on to say, I know firsthand that Iran has a very capable intelligence service with networks and cells all over the world. We haven't even seen those networks activated yet. But terrorism, sabotage, and destabilization are all on the table. When you stack all of this together, a bigger picture emerges. A picture of incompetence, lack of planning, and an inability to even intellectually grasp the scale of the crisis that they've created. That's why this conflict is spinning out of control. And this is where America's alliances will be critical. Right now, European allies are hesitantly supporting the United States. The French have sent their fighter jets. The Dutch have sent warships. Even the Ukrainians are sending drone teams. And we know they're good at that drone stuff. All this comes despite repeated disrespect from the Orange Disasters regime over the past year. Because even if America's leaders don't understand the gravity of the moment, the allies do. They recognize how dangerous this moment is and are attempting to protect, stabilize, and de-escalate the situation. On the other hand, Trump, Hegseth, Rubio, Nolan, you know the names, they have failed in their duty to act in the best interest of American people. In just 5 short days, they unilaterally committed the United States to a massive regional war. And this conflict dwarfs Iraq and Afghanistan in complexity and scale. And when we look at who's in command, who's making decisions, coordinating with allies, what we see is a team of Fox News hosts, podcasters, nepotism babies, billionaires, and Mar-a-Lago influencers. White, entitled, and incompetent. That's how I was trying to think of that Lori Daniel Favors calls them. White, entitled, and incompetent. And presiding all of them at the head of the table is a callous, diminished moron, barely literate, who spent more time socializing with Jeffrey Epstein than preparing this country for the possibility of war with Iran. Let's be clear about something. Wars don't spiral out of control because of fate. They spiral out of control because incompetent people start them. Bunch of dumbasses. What we're witnessing right now is not strategy, it's not diplomacy, and it sure as hell ain't leadership. It's recklessness disguised as patriotism. The same people who scream America first are now dragging America into a 17-nation regional war without the diplomatic infrastructure, the intelligent coordination, or the international credibility required to manage such an endeavor. They gutted the very institutions that prevent war from spreading. They fired diplomats, they weakened the intelligence units, they dismantled international aid systems that stabilize regions after conflict. And now the same people who burned the fire exits are telling Americans not to panic while the building fills with smoke. And this is what happens when foreign policy is run like a reality TV show. Instead of seasoned diplomats, you get television personalities. Instead of strategic thinkers, you get podcasters and influencers. And instead of quiet professionals who understand the complexity of the Middle East, you get ideologies who think geopolitics works like a cable news segment. But the Middle East is not a talk show panel. It's a chessboard layered with centuries of history, alliances, rivalries, and proxy networks. And Iran is not Iraq. Iran has regional allies, intelligence networks, cyber capabilities, and asymmetrical warfare strategies that make the last 2 decades of American war look simple by comparison. So when you hear politicians talk about this conflict like it's a clean military operation, understand what you're hearing. Propaganda. Because wars of this magnitude don't stay contained, they spread through oil markets, through regional militias, through cyber attacks, through terrorism and covert operations. And if those Iranian intelligence networks around the globe activate, as many experts warn they could, this war won't just be fought in the Persian Gulf. It could reach cities far beyond the battlefield. So the real question isn't whether the situation is dangerous. The real question is why the people who dismantled America's diplomatic and intelligence infrastructure were allowed to start it in the first place. History will judge this moment. And this war continues to spiral. Future generations may look back and say something chilling. That the greatest threat to American security wasn't Iran. It was the reckless leadership that pushed the first domino. This is Open Eye, WHGE 95.3 FM. WHGE 95. WHGE 95.3 FM. Hope you learned something today. Learned something before I got here. All right. And as we close today's edition of Open Eye, remember something that powerful institutions have always understood. Control the narrative, you control the people. That's why history gets rewritten. That's why uncomfortable truths disappear from textbooks. That's why corruption gets buried under political talking points and the media spin. Here's the problem with suppressing truth. Truth has a way of resurfacing. It resurfaces in archives, whistleblowers. It resurfaces in communities who refuse to forget what they've lived through. And resurfaces in conversations like the ones we have right here. Because Open Eye isn't just a radio show, it's a reminder that thinking critically is an act of independence, that questioning power is a form of citizenship, and that understanding history is one of the greatest tools we have for protecting our own future. So wherever you are today, whether you're driving, working, sitting at your kitchen table, remember this. Pay attention, ask questions, and read beyond the headlines. And never let anyone convince you that ignorance is safer than awareness. This is the Open Eye. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority. You treat you as an option. This has been Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining me. All right. Thanks for joining me. I didn't talk about them much, but you know what's on my mind. Be careful over there, Africa. Global African supremacy, we need it. Because the world was a much better place when the African ruled. I'm Patrice Gibbs.